Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Burke, and I am the Executive Director for the Pennsylvania School Bus Association. And I wanted to welcome you all. Thank you, Amy. Amy Daw let me know that you can hear me. Thank you, Wendy. That was my first question, make sure everybody could hear me. So I want to welcome you. This is to our Driver in the Know webinar series, and this is a first for us, and we're excited to have you all here. Again, my name is Mike Burke. I'm the Executive Director for PSBA. Joining me on the webinar is Christina DeLisi, our Member Services Coordinator. And we are really pleased to partner with our friends at Keystone on this series, which is focused on school bus drivers. We know that your commitment to the safety and to safety and our students is what has made school bus transportation the safest method of getting kids to and from school every day. So we thank you for your dedication. We thank you for being here. We hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. For those of you who have not been on these calls before, webinars before, I want to give you a little bit of the layout of the land here. First of all attendees are on listen-only mode. You're all muted. I'm going to ask Linda and Christina if they would also mute themselves as well. These are two additional folks who are, Linda Neff is also listening in. So if they would go ahead and mute themselves, that would be great. I will do the same when I start. The reason we keep everybody on mute is we're going to have, when this is all done, somewhere between around, I imagine, over 60 people on this webinar, and it gets really, really tough to hear everybody. So we block out the background noise. If you have any questions during the webinar, you will see on the little dashboard you have that there is a question function that you can ask, that you can pose questions to us. We'd ask that you submit your questions, type them in that box, submit them. Our presenter, Mike Kuiros, will answer those at the end. We're going to save our questions to the end. So another thing you should know is that these webinars are recorded, and a link will be made available in the members only section of our website. You will also get an email following this webinar with which will include the handouts, the presentation you have today, that you're seeing today, as well as a link to that webinar. So without further hesitation, I'd like to introduce our webinar, Mike Kuiros. Mike is the team leader for Keystone Risk Management's corporate office located in North Huntingdon, PA. Mike also serves as a senior safety consultant, where he promotes and advocates risk management services to a diverse range of industries, which includes but is not limited to oil and gas, manufacturing, medical, retail, and construction. Every safety program he implements is tailored to fit the specific needs of each of his clients. In addition to providing safety services, Mike specializes in Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration regulations, working closely with Keystone's partners and their clients to improve their risk profiles, making them more attractive in the insurance marketplace. Mike is a graduate of Slippery Rock University and has earned his bachelor's degree in safety management. So it is time. I'm pleased to introduce and welcome Mike Kuiros to PSBA. Mike, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here, and take it away.
Yes, thank you for having me, Mike. So as Mike Burke mentioned, one of the things I do here for Keystone is I'm the manager of our DOT services. So I work with a diverse number of clients that deal with DOT regulation, including school bus companies. And it's when we go through the presentation, we'll be able to tell the difference between school bus companies and regular DOT regulated companies, which we'll discuss. Okay, so the reason why we're doing this is the Driver in the Know series. So what we want to make sure that you, as the driver, understand is that you are a valued person of the company, your valued driver. And the reason why we're going over everything we are today is that compliance does start with you, the driver. A lot of what we're going to talk about today has to deal with what you guys do on the roadside, your behaviors on the road, and how all that stuff actually does affect the company overall when it comes to actually having operating authority through the DOT, or actually getting insurance and getting lower rates based off of your roadside behaviors. What we're going to talk about is what constitutes a commercial motor vehicle, hours of service, and how that applies to bus drivers, driver vehicle inspection reports, which we'll get into, but driver vehicle inspection reports are maybe the most important thing you guys can do as a driver, is actually inspecting your vehicle pre and post trip, making sure we're doing a thorough job of doing that. And I will discuss of how that can affect the company overall if we're not doing that correctly. We're going to talk about different scores that are related to the DOT, which is basic and ISS scores, and how that's directly related to you, the value driver. We're going to talk about how the DOT could actually come in to do an audit. So some different triggers that would bring the DOT in, some common violations and fines, and how you, the driver, need to stay compliant. Okay, so we're all regulated by the FMCSA, which is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. That's who actually, similar to like OSHA, holds all the standards for everything that we do with a commercial motor vehicle. There's so much different types of compliance that are associated with this. What we're going to talk about today is what is geared towards you, the driver, and how you could really help your company by being that model employee out there on the road, and lower our insurance rates, have good rates on the road as far as basic scores and ISS scores. It goes a long way for you and your company. Now, one thing I want to mention is if we're not in compliance and we do have bad scores on the road, that's directly related to our insurance. So the higher those numbers go, the higher insurance is going to go. Automobile right now is one of the hardest lines to write. That's why these numbers are so important and why you are so valued. So like I said, we're going to discuss all those regulations and how that brings you into the mix. So as far as a commercial motor vehicle, what is it? Well, when it comes to passenger carrier vehicles, it's from 9 to 15 passengers, including the driver. So you are actually under all the regulations besides drug and alcohol testing, pretty much, meaning that you do not have to have a CDL. As soon as you get into the school bus that's 16 plus, including the driver, that constitutes you to have a CDL. And when you have a CDL, you do have to actually do the DOT regulated drug and alcohol testing program. The one thing we want to talk about is hours of service. Okay, and these are all the hours of service rules and regs that relate directly to you guys, the drivers. And I'm going to explain to each one of these individually afterwards, but there's the 100 air mile exemption, which we'll go through. The 10-hour rule, which means we can't drive more than 10 hours in a day. The 15-hour rule, which means we can't drive a commercial motor vehicle after the 15th hour on duty. 60 hours in 7 days, this is probably going to be for most of us. What that means is we cannot drive a commercial motor vehicle after the 60th hour on duty in a 7-day period. So typically that's a Monday through Friday operation. If you are a school bus company that actually operates every single day, that would be 70 hours in an 8-day period. Now these are both floating 7 or 8-day periods, and the only way you can go back down to 0 is by using your 34-hour restart. So like I said, I think that this constitutes for most of the drivers, if you are off on the weekend, you would get that 34-hour restart in, basically meaning that every Monday morning your clock would start back down to 0. When we're doing this, we have to have a minimum of 30 minutes off duty in an 8-hour window. So basically what that means is we can never be on duty more than 8 hours without taking a 30-minute break. We also have to have 8 hours off duty between our shifts, and that's just standard across the board. So no matter what exemption rule, whatever it may be you fall under, we have to have 8 hours off duty between shifts. We're also going to talk about on-duty hours, and that actually constitutes working for other employers. And we'll get into that a little more here shortly. So a lot of times when you have bus drivers, maybe you had somebody that used to drive a dump truck, or maybe you're somebody that used to drive over the road tractor trailer, whatever it may be, and you're used to certain hours of service rules. Well, the passenger carriers have different hours of service rules than your property carriers. The major ones are the ones you see here on the screen. Basically, the 11-hour rule moved to 10 hours. So that means we cannot physically drive more than 10 hours in a 15-hour period. The 15-hour rule actually changed from the 14-hour rule. The 14-hour rule was we cannot drive a commercial motor vehicle after the 14th hour on duty, and now that's 15. The off duty between shifts used to be 10 hours with property carriers, and now it's 8 hours for you, the passenger carriers. Just a little bit of the difference. Like I said, if you guys made that switch between driving property to passenger, just a reminder for all you out there that there is a difference. One thing I want to mention too is I talked to Mike Burke before this, and we're probably going to be able to give out the PDF of this presentation along with a recording. So if you did want to go back and look at all the regulations we are discussing today, you would be able to do so. This is the biggest thing here that we'll probably talk about today that does get a little confusing. But when it comes to hours of service rules and regulations, there are exemptions. So if you see here on this graph, basically, if you're going from school to home or home to school, if you see there, you're exempt from all the hours of service rules and regs. However, to make extra money, a lot of our school bus drivers want to do extracurricular school activities, whether that be a sporting event, a ski trip, whatever it may be. At that point in time, you are subject to hours of service rules and regs. The exemption, remember, is only from school to home, home to school. Now, for the extracurricular activities, if we are staying within the 100 air mile radius and being off the clock completely within 12 hours, then once again, we actually are exempt. And this is what they call the 100 air mile exemption. You have to abide by all 5 of these rules that you see here in front of you. If one of these are not met, then basically the air mile exemption does not come into effect. So what that means is that the driver must start and stop from the same work location. So that means we can't drive somewhere, stay overnight, and then come back in the morning. That wouldn't work. Must stay within the 100 air mile radius from that start and stop point. Must be completely off the clock within 12 hours. Must have 8 consecutive hours off duty between shifts, and then physically cannot drive more than 10 hours in that shift. When we're actually utilizing the 100 air mile exemption, at that point in time, you no longer have to use that 30-minute break either. We need ways of showing that we fall into this exemption. A lot of times people use time cards or just like a timesheet just to show our start and stop time, so that if we did get actually pulled over by the DOT, we'd be able to easily show them, say, hey, look, I'm within the 12 hours, I'm within the 100 air miles, I do not need a logbook. I also want to explain what on-duty time means. Okay, on-duty time goes to that 15-hour window that we were talking about, which means you could still work after the 15th hour on duty. You just can't drive a commercial motor vehicle at that point in time. On-duty time is basically everything that you're doing when you're on the clock. So that could be even like washing your truck or your bus, performing your DVIR. The other thing too is other compensated work. So a lot of us bus drivers probably have another job. So what that means is if you're bartending on the weekends, technically that time that you're working for another employer does count towards our hours of service rules and regs. The reason for hours of service in general is the fatigue of the driver. And so if you think about it, if you work all week driving bus and then you work all weekend somewhere else, what they're thinking is that you would be fatigued. And that's why the hours of service rules and regs are in place. So if we are working for another employer, we're supposed to let our employers know that we are doing so, and we need to keep track of those hours. I'm not going to go through all this, but once again, like I said, this is going to be provided to you after the webinar today, but just to show you of everything that means on-duty time. So once again, if you're showing up for work, you're clocked in, that's on-duty time. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky here, but off-duty time basically means that we're not driving, we're not working for the employer. However, when it comes to extracurricular activities, and let's just say you're doing a sporting event that's you know, a few hours away, the sporting event itself is a few hours, and then we're driving back at the end of the day. So what the exemption that is in place for bus drivers, if you see the 3 bullet points here, we can consider ourselves off duty once we get to the location, and then basically we cease all responsibilities and duties as far as working for the company we're working for. So the driver must be relieved of all duty and responsibility for the care and custody of the bus or passenger carrying commercial motor vehicle, its accessories, and any other passenger's baggage and freight that it may be transporting. So to give you an example, we stop at a sporting event, that if you, the driver, basically at that point in time are allowed to do whatever you want. You can go shopping, you can go eat lunch, you can go take a nap, whatever you want to do. At that point in time, even if you are getting compensated at a lesser rate, which is typically what a lot of people do, that time could be considered off duty. Okay, and if you see down here at the bottom, off-duty time taken during the day, such as a lunch break, nap, it does not count towards that 15-hour limit. Okay. So some of our buses might have ELDs in them. Now, if you have to have an ELD, there's reasons for that. If you see here, the first bullet point basically saying that if you fall under the hours of service rules and regulations, meaning we're not doing home to school, school to home, and we're doing extracurricular activities, if you have to do paper logs more than 8 days out of a 30-day floating period, basically that means we have to have an ELD. If you're somebody that has to actually go, you're going to sell the vehicle, lease another vehicle, or take that vehicle for repair, then basically you're exempt from the ELD. If the bus was manufactured before the year 2000, you're exempt. But just remember, we're exempt from electronic logging devices. We still would have to actually use paper in the event that we are going to fall into the hours of service rules and regs. But just remember, we can't do more than 8 in a 30-day period. When we are doing our logbooks, what they call record of duty status, and that just basically means it could be a logbook, it could be a timesheet, a way of showing our duty status. When the DOT is going to actually audit that, and that's where you, the driver, comes in, they're looking for form and manner, falsification, and supporting documentation. So form and manner means basically completion of the log. So we don't want to have any blanks left on it. When I'm auditing these logs, the things that I see mostly is on the right-hand side where we're tallying up the hours for the 24-hour period. Basically what that's supposed to do is just make sure that your math is correct and making sure that that window shows the full 24 hours of your day. We need to make sure, well, actually on the next slide, I'm going to show you everything we need to have on it. But supporting documentation, meaning fuel receipts and toll receipts or anything like that, what the DOT is going to look at is, let's just say you're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at 8 in the morning on July 24th. What they'll look at to see is supporting documentation. Maybe you got fuel at that point in time, and they would look at the time, the date of the receipt, and then look back at your log and make sure that the log is correct to show that you were at that point at that time, and it shows on your log. Here's what a typical driver's log looks like. So we're actually going to show all of our off-duty time. So let's say, like in this one here, you see that the person starts at 6 in the morning. So we would want to show a line for the prior time that we were actually off-duty, because remember, this is a full 24-hour window. Sleeper berth, I highly doubt that this would pertain to too many people, but we would want to show that. Driving time, we're going to want to show that. And then all on-duty time. Remember, on-duty time is everything but driving. So whether you're doing your DVIR, like I said, washing the truck, doing whatever you have to do, you're getting compensated for it. That's considered on-duty time. Now, if you see up here, one thing we're going to do is total driver miles for the day. If you have a co-driver, we want to put that in there. We want to make sure we're showing the unit number. Shipping number, we wouldn't have anything like that. But we want to make sure that the carrier name's on there and then the main office address. We also need to make sure that we're signing off on the log. Once again, remember, when the DOT is looking at this, they're looking for form and manner, which is completion of the log. Another very important thing we're going to talk about today is driver vehicle inspection reports. And like I said, by you, the driver, doing this on the or before, pre and post trip, it's truly going to help out the company immensely. Remember, we're going to be pointing out things that we could get violations for on the roadside. So whether it be inoperable lamps, the tire tread depth is too low, the fire extinguisher isn't mounted and secured, whatever it may be, that is what we're supposed to be checking pre and post trip. Now, beyond that, remember that we're school bus drivers and we have children that we're transporting. So beyond even just helping out the company, making sure we have a safe vehicle, we want to make sure we have a safe vehicle for the students that we're transporting. As far as compliance goes with the DVIR, it's very similar to logbooks, where we want to have form and manner, which means completion of the DVIR. Now, if there is no issues with the DVIR, what we do is just sign off saying that everything is satisfactory. If there is a safety sensitive issue, remember, we want to be as descriptive as possible. So an example would be, if I just wrote on there tires, well, if I'm the mechanic and I look back at your DVIR and it says tires, well, what's wrong with the tires? Which tire is it? You need to be as descriptive as you possibly can be to help everybody out. Once the mechanic actually fixes the issue that you write up on the DVIR, they need to sign off saying that it's been fixed. And then the next person taking that bus back into service needs to sign off saying that, yes, they agree it's been fixed. So if you think about it, technically there could be 3 different people signing off on this DVIR. It would be the driver that initially writes it up, the mechanic that fixes it, and then we might not be taking that same bus into service that day and somebody else might be taking it. So once again, that driver needs to sign off saying that they agree it's been fixed. Out of service violations, if any of you have been on roadside inspections, basically out of service violation means that the DOT thinks it's bad enough to where they said this vehicle can't move until this has been fixed. Out of service violations must be fixed prior to that vehicle being put back into service. And if we do get caught by not fixing that issue and continue to drive it, it could be a major violation for you, the driver, and the company. Well, here's one that Keystone put out as far as an inspection checklist. You guys might have one that looks like this or very similar, but this is what we call the DVIR. So this is everything we want to be checking off. And remember, it's pre and post trip. So even if your company doesn't require you to do a written one pre and post trip, I recommend at least one of those times we have a documented DVIR. The reason for it, and even if I was myself driving, if I didn't have to actually document it, there'd definitely be some days that I probably wouldn't do the DVIR. And like I said, it is very important that we do them. In the comment section there, if you see down below, that's where we want to be as descriptive as we can. So once again, if it's an inoperable lamp, which one is it? Turn signal, tail light, brake light, whatever it may be, which side. We want to be as descriptive as we possibly can be. Now this to me is a very eye-opening slide here. The top ones basically have to do with drug and alcohol tests, which is more the employer. The ones I highlighted below would be for you, the driver. So if you look at the numbers here as far as average fines versus top fines, some of them are very, very high in dollar amounts, which could cripple a company. So this is what it shows. That's why you are a value driver. What you guys do on the roadside does affect you and everybody else you work with. So the driver fails to keep a logbook or makes false entries. We're talking about an average fine of about $9,000 up to a top fine of $137,000. Now, obviously, the top fines means repeated violations and issues that would result in something that high. Operating a commercial motor vehicle after being on duty 60 hours in the 7-day period. Remember, we could still work for the company. We can't drive a commercial motor vehicle after the 60th hour on duty. If you do reach that 60 hours, remember, we could use the 34-hour restart and start our clock back down to 0. The average fine for that is around $5,000 up to a top fine of almost $22,000. Driving past 14 hours on duty for you guys would be 15 hours. We're talking about 7,000 average fine up to 120,000. And then failing to require a driver to complete a DVIR, about $4,000 all the way up to almost $10,000. Like I said, those bottom 4 really pertain to you guys, the drivers, and you could see the impact it can have on your company. When we're thinking about stuff like this, what I always like to tell everybody, because we're all in this together, if we continuously have these fines and violations, we could lose our operating authority, we could lose our insurance. Also, think about this money has to come from somewhere. If we continuously have to pay fines, that could affect raises, everything. So we're all in this together. We need to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing on the roadside. Actually get audited by the DOT. For you guys, the drivers, basically is going to be basic scores past threshold limits, which I'll explain, a high profile or fatal accident, and then safety related complaints. So if you think about it, you are a school bus driver, you have a huge billboard on the side of the bus and it's bright and yellow. So you're not camouflaging on the roadside. So if something happens, if you're driving erratically, if you're speeding, especially if there's children on board, somebody's going to call and complain probably. So when it comes to that, remember, we're going to be on our best behavior on the roadside. We do have precious cargo, and we need to make sure that the community sees us as that. So for us, every DOT or every company that's a DOT number has a rating. Okay, and that's either going to be satisfactory, conditional, unsatisfactory, or if you see on this picture here, not rated. Not rated is not good, it's not bad, it just means that we never actually went through a DOT audit. The current process basically is 6,000 ratings from audits per year out of 525,000 carriers in the United States. So there isn't a whole lot of audits that go on based off of the number of DOT numbers out there. But if they are going to be auditing you, typically there's a reason for it. And that's what I'm going to show you here. This is all the roadside stuff. Okay, so this is what directly relates to you guys, the drivers. And this is all the basic scores. So what they're looking at is unsafe driving, hours of service violations, driver fitness, controlled substance, vehicle maintenance, and then the crash indicator. So if you see the bars here that are in the red, that means that they're over the threshold limits. When you end up over the threshold limit, the DOT is going to send out a letter, basically a warning to the company saying that if you don't fix this, we are going to come in for an audit. Typically, that's when I see a lot of companies reach out to me to come help them fix it so that they don't get audited by the DOT. But if these numbers, as you see in this snapshot here, if they continue to rise, we're going to have issues, and the DOT most likely is going to come in to do an audit. And once again, if they come and do an audit, they could revoke our operating authority, which means nobody could drive at that point in time. That's why it's very important for you guys to know what you guys do on the roadside does affect everybody. Also, before I go back here real quick, this is all based off of a 24-month window. So there's two ways to lower these numbers, and that's basically time. So every 24 months, a violation will drop off after 2 years of being on a record, and then going through inspections without violations. Now, I don't ever tell people just to start going through inspections and stuff like that, because typically, the DOT will probably find something. So that's why it's important to make sure we're doing our inspections, our preventative maintenance, everything to a T, so that if we do get pulled over, we'll get a clean bill of health. Accidents really affect insurance and the basic scores as well. So any type of accident involved with a bus, obviously we're probably going to get media involved. It's just never going to be good for us as a company. So the types of accidents, though, that are what they call DOT recordable is human fatality, bodily injury that would actually need medical attention, and then disabling damage to any vehicle which would require a tow away. So an easy way I always tell everybody to remember that is nurse, hearse, or tow. Nurse meaning medical, hearse if somebody gets killed, and then tow if any vehicle gets towed. And I'll give you an example. If a vehicle comes and hits your bus while you're driving in, it's not your fault, and that vehicle needs towed away, it's considered a recordable accident. Now, I know that's not very fair to the company or you, but that's why it's very important to make sure that we're being as safe as we can on the roadside, because what they base it off of is 1 million miles driven. So if we have 1 or 2 accidents, it's probably going to take us over that threshold and put us on the radar of the DOT. This is another rating that the DOT has out there, and once again, it's directly related to you guys, the drivers, and it's called the ISS score, which is called Inspection Selection System. Now, when this comes into play is actually when you get a roadside inspection. So let's just say you get pulled over for whatever reason. Let's just say it's an inoperable lamp. DOT pulls you over, they go back to their vehicle, and it's going to look something like this. When they pull it up on their screen in the police vehicle, based off the DOT number, they're going to see an inspection value. Now, if you see in this in particular is 100, which means inspect. Now, the ratio is 3 tiers here, as you can see, based off of the stoplight. If you're in the pass phase, they'll let you go. If you're in the middle phase, which they call optional, it's up to them whether they do a further inspection or not. But if you're in the red, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. They have to do an inspection. And what that means is a level 1 inspection for those of you who have been through a roadside inspection before. A level 1 inspection typically takes about 2 hours. So that's going to take up a lot of your time. And also, they're going to be inspecting the vehicle thoroughly and the driver. So at the end of that 2 hours, they're probably going to find something. So that's why it's very important for us to keep this score here under control. So for this company in particular, this is actually a bus company I dealt with a while back. You see here, it's all based off of basic alerts, which was hours of service compliance, driver fitness, controlled substance, vehicle maintenance, and those are all issues based off of what the drivers are doing on the roadside that really spike these numbers up, which is why we're doing what we're doing today. A lot of you guys, the drivers, probably didn't even know that these numbers existed. That's why we're doing the training today. Hopefully that you guys know and understand that what you do really does affect us. And we'd like to see you on your best behaviors on the roadside. This same company, throughout the entire year of 2019, as you can see, was in the pass phase. So they were at a 21 to a 20 the entire year. And if you see back in February 11th of 2020, they jumped up all the way past into the 94 stage, which is the inspect stage. Now, I'll just give you some history on what actually happened here. The DOT came in for an audit. Part of their audit, they actually went into the yard and inspected all of the buses that were leaving for that day. When they were inspecting all the buses leaving for that day, they found tons and tons of issues relating to brakes, tires, lamps, unsecured fire extinguishers. So in one day, basically, they got multiple violations, and as you can see, it really affected their ISS score and jumped it up to a 94. And like I said, that's why it's important. If you see that these numbers weren't true, the 21s and the 20 means that they just didn't get inspected as much. So really what it was luck. Once they got inspected, as you can see, the numbers jumped up drastically. That's why it's important to be set ahead of it, be proactive, make sure we're doing our inspections thoroughly and getting the items fixed promptly, so that on the roadside inspections, we're not getting dinged. As far as you guys, the drivers, one of the main things that you guys need to remember is that we're pulling MVRs, which is your motor vehicle record, upon hire and then annually thereafter. And to be honest with you, we're probably pulling them more than that even. And this is what we're basing it off of. Remember, this isn't just for what you're doing at work. This is also in your personal life. So what they're looking at is minor violations, at-fault accidents, and major violations. And this goes back 10 years. So as you see, to be borderline, you don't have to have many violations to be borderline. And then same thing to be ineligible. Now, going back 10 years, if we're ineligible, there's not much we can do about it. This is really the matrix that most of us at the PSBA are using. So you as the driver, just think about that and make sure, once again, remember in our personal life, we shouldn't be speeding around. We should be abiding the traffic laws because it can affect us in the workplace. And here I just have a list of major violations. So if you go back to this, if you look here, one or more major violation within the past 10 years is automatically going to put us at ineligible. So looking at this list here, just remember, like I said, if we're driving erratically outside of the workplace, it is going to affect us in the workplace. The other thing too, and this goes back to not only just the safety of you and the cargo, which is the children, also has to do with hours of service, and it's staying healthy. So this is actually from the FMCSA, what they say about the driver and staying healthy. So we want to make sure we're keeping a regular sleep schedule. One thing I always point out is the Tracy Morgan incident. Tracy Morgan is a comedian that actually, his limo was hit by a Walmart truck, killing one of the people that he was with and seriously injuring him. And then when they actually went back and investigated it, the guy was under the hours of service rules. However, he told his supervisor prior to that he only slept 3 hours in the past 33 hours. So what that means is he was fatigued. He should have never got behind the wheel. He fell asleep, and is why he actually wrecked into the vehicle. So we want to make sure that if you don't get a good sleep that night, you were up all night, we shouldn't be driving. Okay, so take that upon yourself to make sure to say, I have precious cargo, I probably shouldn't be driving today. So we want to make sure we're keeping a regular sleep schedule. We create a sleep-friendly environment. We engage in relaxing, non-alerting activity at bedtime. We're going to limit the eating and drinking before bedtime. We should be exercising regularly. Taking naps if you're able to. A 20 to 30-minute nap can help promote short-term alertness. And it's also, if you ever taken a 20-minute nap, it really does just make your day a lot better. And we only want to get in bed when we're tired. So if you can't fall asleep within 15 minutes, go into another room, relax until you're actually sleepy. So how could you, the driver, stay compliant? So we need to make sure we have our licenses on us, a copy of our CDL, and a copy of our medical card. Now, as far as a copy of our medical card, one thing that I'm always asked a question about is, my medical card is supposed to be tied to my CDL. Do I still need to carry it with me? Now, remember, when you're dealing with a roadside officer, every one of them is different. So if you don't have your medical card on you, maybe that person would decide to give you a violation. Now, they shouldn't be doing that, but however, I just say to make it easier on yourself, and while we're dealing with the roadside inspection, we should have a copy of the medical card on us, just to make it easier across the board. We need to have a record of duty status to make sure that it shows, you know, I'm within the 100 air miles, or you could have something that shows I'm doing the home to school, school to home. I'm exempt from hours of service. We need a way of showing that we're under the hours of service rules or we're exempt. If you do have an electronic logging device equipped in the vehicle, we must have the instruction booklet readily available for the instance that we would actually get pulled over. If we don't have the instruction booklet, we could actually get fined for not having that. The reason for that is that the roadside officer is going to want to actually log into your ELD to see if you are compliant. And if they don't have the instruction booklet, they can't do that. As we discussed, we want to complete the driver vehicle inspection reports pre and post trip. The major things we're looking at that is an easy thing to get violations on the roadside is the lights, our extinguisher, is the gauge in the green, is it mounted, is it secured, is our tire depth good? All those types of things we're going to be looking at once again on a daily basis. And if we're under that routine, we should only take us 15 minutes to do a thorough DVIR. What I always call is, what we don't want to do is pencil whip it, meaning that we're filling out the form, but we're really not doing the DVIR. Obviously, wear your seatbelt. Now, I have that capitalized because not only is it a law, but it's, as far as those basic scores we discussed earlier, there's weights associated with every violation, and not having a seat or not wearing your seatbelt is the highest weight you can get, which is a 10. Same thing with talking on your cell phone. So we should never be talking on our cell phones, and we should never not wear a seatbelt. If you are using your cell phone for GPS for whatever reason, be careful, because if you have your cell phone on your hand, you can get pulled over, and once again, at that point, it's your word against theirs, and that could possibly be a violation. So if anybody's using the cell phone as a GPS, I suggest that we get a holder, and you know, they have the suction cups that go in the windows, or it goes into like the air duct there. However, you would want to make sure that we're not holding it in our hands. And obviously, no speeding. If you speed, we already talked about maintaining a favorable MVR. If you're speeding, that's going to affect your MVR. It's also going to show up as violations for us, which the basic weights on those are very high as well. Okay, so at this point, I wanted to open it up to questions. And Mike, I don't know if you wanted to chime in to start, see if we got any questions from
Certainly.
anybody.
Yeah, and again, if anyone has any questions for Mike, please use the question function. I do have one here. I think this goes back to when you were talking about the ratings, and it had to do with, what if you don't have a DOT number because you don't need one, being that you only transport intrastate?
Well, that would depend. So intrastate, once again, remember, going back to this slide, a lot of people think that if you're intrastate, it doesn't matter. The only time that you would be exempt is the school to home, home to school. If you're doing extracurricular activities, you should have a DOT number, because at that point in time, you're no longer exempt, and you're supposed to fall under the FMCSRs, which is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. So in that specific situation, you know, maybe we could even have a sidebar conversation after this. I'll bring back up my my contact information, because there is going to be case by case basis, but obviously I'm here to help everybody, so we can determine whether you do or do not need to have a DOT number.
Okay, and that was referring to the roadside inspections and scores, so that's what that was referring to.
Yeah, so if you do, but still, so this is something we discussed earlier. If you do get a roadside inspection without a DOT number, it's still going to show up, because remember, the whole purpose of this, and remember, it's to make sure the safety of the vehicle and the public. So when they're actually doing the inspections, it's not just to, you know, give you a hard time. It's supposed to be overall for the safety of you, the cargo, and the public. So you're still going to be susceptible to all those inspections.
Okay. Question on how do you get a DOT score?
Well, it depends what score you're talking about. So there's the basic scores, which the way you'd get those are all based off of roadside inspections and how many inspections you
Okay.
go through. The ISS score, same thing. It's all based off roadside inspections. And then the actual DOT rating, the way you'd get that is if the DOT physically came in to do an audit on your company. And at that point in time, they would either give you conditional, unsatisfactory, or satisfactory.
Okay. Any other questions for Mike? This was terrific. Got a couple of nice. FMC is okay, and I do have just an FYI. FMCSA is now allowing for the exclusion of unpreventable accidents for basic crash calculation. And that came over from our friend Gary Gillespie, who is on the call.
Yeah, so actually, what I've been seeing lately, and in fact, I just had a DOT audit for one of our companies out west that I deal with, and we went back to that nurse Hershey tow, what's a reportable accident. They had those on there, and basically when they got audited, we had to show proof that it was not at fault, and they did take that off of our record. But that's why, like, actually looking at our basic scores on a regular basis, our accidents, is important, because if you see something on there that does not look right, what we need to do is contest it and get it taken off.
Okay. Getting some comments. Thanking you for the information, by the way, Mike. Some nice comments here. So if there are, I'm not seeing any more questions. I'll give one more call out for any questions. Obviously, you're going to have Mike's contact information, which is going to be part of the handouts, and we'll send this presentation off to everybody. And so if you have anything that stuff always comes up after we leave, after we get off of here. I will draw everyone's attention that we do have on the, I had a question here. Are you willing to come out and do a safety meeting for school bus contractors if requested?
Absolutely. It's something I do actually for some of the members already for the PSBA. I've been out there to do like the ramp up right before school starts type thing.
Yep.
We also do mock DOT audits to where we can tell you where all your holes are at and how to fix them, plus consultation. And obviously you guys have some things through Keystone that are beneficial to help your company as well.
Wonderful. Excellent. Along those lines, I'll let everybody know that we are actually planning 2 additional webinars. If you go to our website and look under education and events, you'll see a link to our webinar page. So we do have some additional webinars coming up, one on Know Your Students, which Linda Neff will be presenting on the 19th. And then Mike will be back with us for Know Your Best Safety Practices. So we have 2 more of these Driver in the Know series webinars coming up. Mike, I want to thank you for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And the information you provided was so helpful for our folks. And everybody, again, please sign up for these next 2 webinars coming up. We look forward to hearing from everybody, seeing you on here again on the 19th. And again, stay in touch with us. With that, I'm going to end the webinar and hope everyone stays safe and healthy. And we hope to hear from you all soon. Thanks again, Mike, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.